The Dakota Badlands stretched endlessly under the merciless August 15th noon sun of 1873. The earth cracked and bleeding like an open wound beneath a sky bleached white with heat. Clara Hendricks stumbled through the skeletal remains of a broken corral, her bare feet leaving crimson prints in the dust, each step a testament to her refusal to die quietly. They buried my family thinking I was dead too. Clara thought, her green eyes blazing with fury that burned hotter than the desert around her. Sheriff Crenshaw put 3 bullets in. Pa made me watch Morrison beat David to death with an axe handle, then left me tied in that root cellar to burn alive. But I crawled out of hell itself, and now I'm going to drag every one of them down with me. Her blue calico dress hung in blood-soaked tatters, torn by 2 days of desperate flight through thorns and rocks. The bullet wound in her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, Crenshaw's parting gift when she'd tried to shield her dying mother. Rope burns circled her wrists like slave shackles, the flesh raw and weeping from hours of struggling against bonds meant to hold her while flames consumed her family's cabin above. Clara had learned something terrible about herself in those hours. Trapped beneath the burning earth, she possessed an inner core of steel that no amount of brutality could bend. Her spine remained straight despite exhaustion, her jaw set in stubborn refusal to surrender. If death was coming for her again, she would meet it standing and spitting defiance. Behind her, dust clouds rose against the shimmering horizon. 2 Lakota riders approached at a measured pace, their horses' hooves drumming a rhythm that spoke of predators closing on wounded prey. Clara turned to face them without cowering, raising her chin despite the tremor in her legs. The lead rider was a man carved from the harsh landscape itself, Chaska, 32 years old, his copper skin marked by battle scars and grief lines that aged him beyond his years. Silver threaded through his black braids, premature gray earned through loss that cut deeper than any blade. In his medicine pouch, wrapped carefully in soft deerskin, lay a spent bullet, unlike any he had seen before, a .45 caliber round, with the letters MC etched crudely into the lead. Akecheta Chaska thought, his hand moving unconsciously to touch the pouch where his brother's death token rested. 3 months since those bounty hunters gunned you down, like a rabid dog claiming you stole horses you never even touched. 3 months since I pulled this carved bullet from your gentle heart and swore to find the bastard who marked his kill like counting coup on the innocent. The mysterious bullet haunted his dreams. No Lakota weapon had fired it. No honest trader recognized its markings. It spoke of custom work of someone who signed their murders like an artist signing paintings. But gentle Akecheta, who had dreamed of becoming a medicine man like their grandfather, died before revealing who had targeted him or why. Beside Chaska, 19-year-old Dakota shifted restlessly on his paint horse. The younger warrior's hand never strayed far from his rifle, his eyes constantly scanning the horizons with the hypervigilance of someone who had grown up expecting violence from all directions. "Brother," Dakota said quietly in Lakota, studying the white woman who faced them without groveling. "The blue-coat soldiers have been ranging closer to our territory every day. If they find us with one of their women, then look at her wounds." Chaska interrupted, his experienced eye taking in evidence of systematic brutality. "This is not their woman. This is their victim, and she carries the same rage we know too well." Clara watched the exchange with growing hope. Something in the lead warrior's bearing reminded her of her father, the same quiet authority, the same instinctive protection of the defenseless. When he dismounted and approached with empty hands, her gamble on Lakota honor might actually pay off. "You are far from any settlement," Chaska observed in careful English, his voice carrying weight but not threat. His mission school education served him well in moments like these. "Your wounds need tending, and the desert shows no mercy to the injured." Clara's response came as barely more than a whisper, her throat raw from screaming and smoke. "Clara Hendricks, and those murdering bastards who did this aren't getting away with it, not if I have to crawl to hell and back to see them hang." The venom in her voice surprised both warriors. This was no broken victim begging for mercy. This was a woman with murder in her heart and the will to see justice done whatever the cost. "How many pursue you?" Chaska asked, noting how she favored her wounded shoulder and the dangerous pallor that spoke of significant blood loss. "3 of the finest law enforcement officers money can buy." Clara spat bitter sarcasm dripping from every word. "Sheriff Marcus Crenshaw and his pet killers. They think they're God's gift to frontier justice, but they're just bandits with badges who murder families and pin the blame on your people." The accusation hit Chaska like a war club to the chest. How many times had he heard similar claims against his own people? How many crimes had been laid at Lakota feet, while the real perpetrators hid behind territorial authority? The sharp crack of rifle fire split the afternoon air, echoing off canyon walls in the distance. Clara's body went rigid, her eyes darting toward the sound, with a mixture of terror and rage that spoke of recent devastating trauma. "They're closing in," she gasped, pressing her blood-stained hand to her shoulder wound. Fresh crimson seeped between her fingers. "Sheriff Crenshaw won't stop hunting me until I'm dead and buried so deep that the truth dies with me." On a distant ridge, 3 riders appeared like harbingers of apocalypse. Even at this distance, the lead figure was unmistakable. A stocky man with silver glinting from his badge and a jagged scar running from ear to mouth across his weathered face, like a pale lightning bolt splitting storm clouds. "And that's him." Clara whispered, her voice tight with remembered horror. "Marcus Crenshaw. Lightning, they call him on account of that twisted scar. He put his special carved bullet gun to my father's head and pulled the trigger while Pa was begging for my family's lives." Dakota's horse danced nervously as the distant riders began their descent toward the canyon floor. "Brother, we must leave immediately. If they catch us harboring her, they slaughtered my entire family over gambling debts." Clara interrupted, her voice cracking with grief and fury. "Then they dressed it up like an Indian raid so they could steal our land and keep their dirty money operation running smooth. I'm the only witness left alive who can prove it was all carefully staged lies." The revelation struck Chaska like lightning illuminating a landscape that had been hidden in darkness. For 3 months he had wondered why bounty hunters had targeted his peaceful brother with such vicious determination, and why they had been so quick to shoot first and manufacture justification later. Now, looking at this brutalized woman and the corrupt lawmen pursuing her with murderous intent, pieces of a vast criminal conspiracy began emerging from the shadows of his understanding. Clara's legs suddenly buckled without warning, and she crashed to her knees in the dust, her face going ashen as blood loss finally overwhelmed her iron will. The strength that had carried her through 2 days of desperate flight across hostile terrain was failing just when she needed it most. "Please," she whispered, the word torn from her lips against every instinct for proud independence. "I won't beg for my life. I've got too much pride left for that. But I'll beg for justice. Don't let them win. Don't let my family die for nothing but a corrupt sheriff's greed." Chaska made his choice in the space between one heartbeat and the next, guided by something deeper than tribal strategy or personal safety. In Clara's desperate courage, he recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood that some fights were worth dying for, that some truths demanded to be told regardless of the price. "Hold tight to the saddle and to life itself," he commanded, sweeping her up in his arms with surprising gentleness for such a warrior. She felt light as a child in his embrace, her body burning with fever, even as it trembled with cold shock. "Dakota, ride hard for the camp," Chaska ordered as he swung up behind Clara, settling her against his chest where she could hear his steady heartbeat. "Tell them to prepare for wounded and pursuit. And tell my Aunt Winona to ready her strongest medicines. This one fights death itself, but her body may not have the strength to win alone." As they spurred their horses into desperate motion, Sheriff Crenshaw's voice carried on the wind like a death sentence pronounced from the gates of hell. Fan out and find that murdering bitch. She can't have gone far, not bleeding like a stuck pig in a slaughterhouse. Find her before sundown, or we're all dancing at the end of a hangman's rope come morning. The raw desperation in the lawman's voice confirmed Clara's worst fears. These men weren't simply pursuing an escaped fugitive. They were hunting down the one person who could expose their systematic criminal enterprise and destroy everything they had built on a foundation of lies, murder, and racial hatred deliberately cultivated for profit. The chase began with the ruthless efficiency of a military operation. Sheriff Marcus Crenshaw took point, his scarred face grim with the focused determination of a man whose life depended on silencing his victim permanently. The twisted facial mark that had earned him his nickname, Lightning, pulled tight with concentration as he studied the ground for hoof prints and disturbed vegetation. Beside him rode Deputy Tom Brewster, whose nervous bulk strained against his badge and whose small pig-like eyes darted constantly between his companions like a cornered rat seeking any possible escape route. At 45, Brewster had spent too many years taking Crenshaw's blood money to harbor any illusions about their business. But he lacked the stomach for the increasingly violent methods their operation required. "Boss." Brewster wheezed sweat pouring down his jowls, despite the desert heat making breathing difficult. "Maybe we should just let her go this time. She's hurt real bad, probably won't last another day in this heat without proper doctoring. Why risk bringing the whole territorial army down on our heads? Because she's not some broken-down farm wife who'll die quiet and forgotten," interrupted Jack Morrison with cold precision. At 38, the former Army scout turned professional killer carried himself with the emotionless efficiency of a man who had made murder his chosen profession. His pale eyes never showed feeling, but his steady hands never missed their intended targets either. "This girl's got more fight and brains than we figured when we planned this operation. Should have put her down clean and permanent when we had the perfect chance." Crenshaw's scar twisted into an uglier configuration as he grimaced with frustrated rage. "Shut your goddamn mouths and keep riding hard. When we catch up to her, no talking, no questions, no mercy. Put her down like a rabid dog, and anyone helping her goes the same bloody way. We end this nightmare today, or we all hang for multiple murder come tomorrow." Miles ahead, racing through terrain that would challenge even the most experienced riders, Chaska pushed his war pony through rocky passages and treacherous footing, while Clara's weight against his chest became increasingly concerning. Her breathing had grown shallow and irregular, punctuated by occasional violent shivers that had nothing to do with the brutal desert heat surrounding them. "Stay with me," he murmured in her ear, feeling her grip on the saddle horn weakening with each passing minute. "My Aunt Winona is the finest healer among our people. She learned her craft from spirits themselves. She will make you strong enough to see your enemies face justice." Clara forced herself to focus on his deep voice, using it as an anchor against the darkness, threatening to claim her consciousness entirely. "Your brother?" she whispered, surprising him by returning to this painful topic. "The one they murdered in cold blood. What was his name? What was he like before they destroyed him?" "Akechita." Chaska replied, his voice softening with memory and loss. "It means soldier in our tongue. But he was gentle as summer rain on prairie flowers. Wanted to be a medicine man like our grandfather, spent his days gathering healing herbs instead of counting coup on enemies. They probably killed him to cover up something else entirely." Clara said, her voice growing stronger with the familiar fuel of righteous anger. "That's exactly how these bastards work: a murder and blame over and over. Create the problem, then profit from the solution. But this time they made a fatal mistake. This time there's a witness who won't stay buried in their convenient grave." The absolute conviction in her voice sent unexpected warmth through Chaska's chest, melting ice that had formed around his heart 3 months earlier. For all this time, he had carried his grief and rage alone. But now, He had found someone who understood the hunger for justice that consumed him day and night. They leapt a washed-out creek bed successfully, Clara crying out softly, as the jarring impact sent fresh pain lancing through her wounded shoulder. Behind them, the sound of pursuit intensified, as their enemies closed the distance with the inexorable patience of wolves following a wounded deer. There she is. Brewster's voice cracked across the evening air like a whip. Movement heading north toward Devil's Canyon. The red bastards are helping her. A rifle shot rang out with deadly precision, the bullet striking sparks off rock inches from Dakota's horse's head. The young warrior wheeled around a massive boulder outcropping, seeking cover, as more shots followed in rapid succession. Chaska urged his mount toward a cluster of thorny scrub brush, using the hardy vegetation as concealment, while they doubled back along a parallel trail known only to his people. Morrison's second shot found its mark with sniper's accuracy, grazing Chaska's left arm and drawing a burning line of fire across his bicep. He gritted his teeth against the pain, but refused to slow their desperate pace toward safety. "You're bleeding." Clara observed guilt, adding another layer to her already overwhelming burden of responsibility for this violence. "It will heal clean." Chaska replied tersely, though the wound burned like liquid fire with each movement. "Can you hold on much longer without collapsing?" Instead of answering with words that might betray weakness, she pressed herself more securely against his broad chest and tightened her grip on the saddle horn until her knuckles went white. Her actions spoke more clearly than any speech. Whatever strength remained in her battered, fever-racked body, she would use every last ounce to ensure their escape succeeded. The Lakota camp lay perfectly hidden in a natural basin carved between towering red sandstone formations, its carefully banked fires invisible from the surrounding ridges that provided both protection and concealment. As Chaska rode in with Clara's semi-conscious form cradled protectively against his chest, the entire camp erupted in controlled but urgent activity. Chaska's Aunt Winona approached with the measured pace of a woman who had spent 45 hard years tending battlefield wounds, childhood fevers, and losing patience despite her best efforts. Her weathered hands, marked by decades of grinding herbs and mixing medicines, were surprisingly gentle as she helped lower Clara from the horse, immediately assessing the damage with eyes that missed nothing. "Bring her directly to my lodge." Winona commanded her small frame, somehow carrying absolute authority that no one questioned. "This child has lost far too much blood. She needs the strongest medicine I possess, and prayers to spirits both seen and unseen." As they carefully carried Clara into the healing lodge, where sweet grass burned constantly and powerful medicine bundles hung from every support pole, young Dakota gathered the tribal council around the central fire. The argument that followed was heated, but conducted in urgent whispers. No one wanted to attract unwanted attention from the white men who might be searching the darkness beyond their carefully guarded perimeter. Grey Wolf, the band's elder leader and repository of 6 decades of hard-won wisdom, spoke first with the authority that came from countless battles and impossible decisions. His scarred face bore permanent testament to decades of violent conflict with encroaching settlers, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had buried too many of his own people. "Chaska, my son, you endanger every soul in this camp." Grey Wolf said, his tone heavy with genuine concern rather than anger. "Do you remember the massacre at Wounded Creek 5 winters ago? The Bluecoat soldiers claimed they found stolen horses in that peaceful camp. Every man, woman, and child died screaming because they harbored white fugitives for a single night. She is not a fugitive running from justice." Chaska replied firmly, allowing a young warrior to examine and bandage his bullet graze with practiced efficiency. "She is a witness to murder, running from the same corrupt lawmen who put a carved bullet through my brother's innocent heart." Young Wolf, Grey Wolf's eldest son and the band's acknowledged war leader, paced restlessly near the flickering fire like a caged wolf. At 35, he had inherited his father's tactical brilliance. but possessed a younger man's willingness to take calculated risks when the potential rewards justified the dangers. If what this white woman claims is true about staged Indian raids. Young Wolf mused, his strategic mind working through possibilities and consequences. Then protecting her might actually give us powerful leverage against our enemies for the first time in years. But if she dies here in our camp, we gain absolutely nothing while losing everything when they come looking for her body. Inside the healing lodge, Winona worked with the quiet efficiency that came from decades of emergency medicine, practiced under impossible conditions. She cleaned Clara's shoulder wound thoroughly with water boiled with powerful antiseptic herbs, noting that while the injury was certainly severe, it would not prove fatal if treated properly and given time to heal. More concerning to her experienced eye were the other clear signs of systematic prolonged abuse: rope burns around wrists and ankles, older bruises in various stages of healing. And most telling of all, the hollow-eyed look of someone who had endured deliberate, calculated brutalization designed to break the spirit as well as the body. Clara drifted in and out of fevered consciousness, mumbling incoherently about burning cellars and carved bullets, while Winona bathed her face with cool water and forced small sips of willow bark tea between her cracked lips, fighting to stabilize her condition while heated debate raged outside about whether she would live long enough to matter. The distant sound of multiple horses moving through the darkness with military precision silenced all argument instantly. Every warrior in camp reached for weapons as Dakota scrambled up the ridge like a mountain cat to observe their unwelcome visitors through the star-filled night. 3 riders circling the valley at careful distance. He reported quietly when he returned, his young face grim with understanding of their tactical situation. They know our general location, but haven't found the exact position of our camp yet. Professional tracking, not random searching. Sheriff Crenshaw's voice suddenly carried across the basin with artificial friendliness. But everyone could hear the underlying steel that promised violence if cooperation was not forthcoming. We know you red devils are in there somewhere. We've got no particular quarrel with you people, but you're harboring a dangerous white fugitive. Send her out peaceable-like, and we'll be on our way with no trouble for anyone. Morrison's harsh laugh echoed off the rock walls like the sound of bones breaking. Woman's a cold-blooded murderer, killed 3 innocent Christian folks in their sleep. She's facing territorial justice one way or another. Don't make us come in there and burn you savages out like the animals you are. The blatant lies struck Chaska like physical blows to his chest and stomach. He had seen Clara's wounds with his own eyes, examined the clear evidence that she was victim rather than perpetrator of violence. Yet these men spoke with the full authority of territorial law, their badges lending official weight to deceptions that could get his entire band slaughtered. Inside the healing lodge, Clara's eyes fluttered open as the threatening voices outside penetrated her fevered consciousness like knives cutting through fog. She gripped Winona's wrist with desperate strength, her fingers digging in like claws. "Don't let them take me back," she whispered with urgent intensity. "They killed my whole family in cold blood and made it look like Indians did it so they could steal our land and keep their money operation running. I saw everything, every detail, every lie they told afterward." Winona's expression hardened with the bitter understanding that came from a lifetime of watching her people blamed for white men's crimes. She had seen this exact pattern before: white criminals using her people as convenient scapegoats, while hiding behind badges and official authority that made their word more believable than any native testimony. Clara's fever finally broke near midnight, leaving her conscious but trembling violently in the lodge's warmth as her body fought off the infection that had threatened to claim her life. With returning consciousness came the inevitable return of terrible memories that delirium had temporarily banished to the shadows of her mind. "They're still out there in the darkness," she observed, seeing Chaska maintaining his silent vigil beside her pallet, with his rifle loaded and ready across his knees. "They wait for dawn to attack," he replied quietly, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had fought this kind of warfare before. "Tell me exactly what happened to your family. Tell me everything, no matter how painful. I need to understand the full scope of what we're fighting against." The words came slowly, at first Clara's voice hesitant, as she forced herself to relive the worst night of her life. Then they came faster, as her desperate need to finally speak the truth overcame lingering fear of not being believed. She told him about her family's modest homestead in Devil's Canyon, about her brother David's mounting gambling debts from Sheriff Crenshaw's rigged poker games, about the 3 armed men who came like death itself on the night of May 12th, when final payment was due. David always hid his important secrets in everyday objects, where people would look but never really see. Clara said, her voice growing stronger as memory sharpened her focus. Said the best hiding place was right in plain sight, disguised as something ordinary. I should have paid closer attention to his warnings about Crenshaw's operation. She described that night of horror with devastating precision, each detail etched permanently into her memory by trauma and grief. How Sheriff Crenshaw shot her father through their cabin door with his service revolver before Pa could even finish his desperate plea for mercy. How Morrison methodically beat David to death with axe handles from their own woodshed while forcing her to watch every brutal blow. How they murdered her mother in cold blood when she threw herself between Clara and Crenshaw's gun. Crenshaw uses special custom bullets. Clara continued, her voice shaking with remembered terror, but growing stronger with each revelation. Has his initials carved into the lead like some kind of sick trophy collection. Said it made the kills look more official and professional when territorial investigators came to examine the bodies. Chaska's blood turned to ice water in his veins. His hand moved involuntarily to the medicine pouch where Akechita's death token rested, that mysterious bullet with MC etched crudely into the soft lead. They scattered genuine Lakota arrows around the bodies like props in a stage play. Clara went on relentlessly, tore up one of Ma's old trade blankets to plant as evidence of Indian involvement. Crenshaw put his scarred face right up against mine and bragged about how they'd successfully blamed 8 other murders on Indian raids over the past 2 years. Said it always worked perfectly. White folks were eager to believe the worst about your people. With trembling hands that shook with more than just fever, Chaska withdrew the carved bullet from his sacred pouch. Clara's eyes widened with horrified recognition as she saw the familiar markings that had haunted her nightmares. Marcus Crenshaw. She breathed, her voice filled with the satisfaction of finally understanding a piece of the puzzle. That's his personal mark, his signature on death itself. Where did you get this bullet? From my brother's body. Chaska replied, his voice tight with barely controlled fury that threatened to consume his rational mind. They claimed Akechita stole horses, but my brother never harmed anyone in his entire gentle life. He was studying to become a healer, not a thief. The revelation reframed everything both of them thought they understood about their separate tragedies. These men had not only murdered Clara's innocent family in cold blood, but had killed Chaska's beloved brother as part of their systematic campaign to cover criminal activities with false accusations against the Lakota people. They have to kill me, Clara concluded, meeting his dark eyes directly with unflinching determination. Because I'm the only living person who can prove their whole profitable operation is built on lies, murder, and deliberately manufactured racial hatred. Without my testimony, they can keep blaming your people for crimes they commit themselves while getting rich off the chaos they create. As dawn light began to creep over the eastern ridges on August 16th, painting the rock formations in shades of rose and gold, the camp prepared for the inevitable assault that would come with full daylight. It arrived at exactly 6:17 in the morning, a rifle bullet punching through the healing lodge wall and burying itself in the wooden frame inches from Clara's head. The attack from 3 coordinated positions. Young Wolf shouted as gunfire erupted throughout the peaceful camp like thunder from a clear sky. Morrison taking the North Ridge Brewster, advancing from the south Crenshaw, pushing up the middle with systematic precision. Chaska rolled instantly from his position beside Clara's pallet, grabbing his rifle as another bullet shattered the hanging medicine bags in a shower of herbs and sacred objects. Winona threw herself protectively over Clara's body, while debris rained down around them like hail from hell itself. The battle was brief, but utterly devastating in its surgical efficiency. A concentrated burst of gunfire from the eastern perimeter ended with Dakota's warrior death cry echoing across the basin like the scream of an eagle falling from the sky. Chaska's young companion, who had ridden beside him faithfully for 3 years and saved his life twice in that time, fell to Morrison's expert marksmanship with a bullet through his heart, his life's blood staining the sacred earth red. Sheriff Crenshaw appeared at the lodge entrance like an avenging demon, his revolver aimed directly at Clara's head with the steady hand of a professional killer. "End of the trail, murdering bitch." He snarled, his scarred face twisted with satisfaction at finally cornering his prey. Clara rolled sideways with desperate speed as his gun barked the bullet, gouging a furrow in the earth where her head had been a split second before. Chaska's rifle answered instantly, his shot catching Crenshaw in the shoulder and spinning him around to crash against the lodge's support poles with a scream of pain and rage. Thick smoke began rising from multiple points around the camp, as the attackers systematically set fires with oil-soaked torches, forcing evacuation under combat conditions, while bullets whistled overhead. Several tribal members turned accusing, frightened eyes toward Chaska as they struggled to save their families. "Aversu, this is your fault," shouted Red Hawk, a warrior whose pregnant wife was struggling toward safety while carrying their youngest child. "You brought this disaster down on all our heads for the sake of one white woman. We leave her behind to save ourselves." Grey Wolf commanded with the harsh authority of desperate leadership. "We cannot carry wounded when our own children's lives hang in the balance." Clara struggled to her feet despite weakness and fresh wounds, her transformation from helpless victim to determined survivor crystallizing in this moment of ultimate crisis. The death of young Dakota, who had died protecting her right to seek justice, had awakened something fierce and uncompromising in her soul. "Give me a weapon," she demanded, her voice carrying new strength forged in fire and grief. "I won't be your burden slowing down the retreat. I'll fight beside you like the warrior Dakota died believing I could become." The steel in her voice and the fire in her green eyes decided Chaska's course without further debate. Dakota died protecting the truth she carries in her memory. He declared to the assembled warriors and elders, "I will not abandon that sacred sacrifice now, no matter what it costs us." As the band began their fighting retreat toward the hidden winter caves, Chaska helped Clara onto his horse and took his position with the rear guard. She was no longer dead weight, hampering their escape grief over Dakota's death, and iron determination to honor his sacrifice by seeing justice done had given her reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. The pursuit through Devil's Canyon became a deadly game of hunter and hunted as the morning sun climbed higher, baking the red rock walls and creating shimmering heat mirages that confused both predator and prey. Chaska and Clara had deliberately separated from the main band during the chaotic evacuation, drawing their 3 enemies away from the women and children who needed precious time to reach the safety of the deeper cavern systems. Sheriff Crenshaw, his shoulder crudely bandaged with strips torn from his own shirt, but his determination utterly undiminished by pain, had set brush fires along the canyon rim in a desperate attempt to smoke out his quarry like animals from their holes. The strategy was working with terrifying effectiveness. Thick, choking smoke filled the narrow passages, while flames crept down the rock faces like the fingers of hell itself, turning the entire canyon into a furnace that threatened to roast everyone trapped within its stone walls. "There they are." Brewster's voice cracked across the superheated air as he spotted movement far below them. Heading for the Narrows, just like you predicted they would, boss. Bullets began spanging off rocks around Chaska and Clara with increasing accuracy as they urged their laboring horse through increasingly treacherous terrain that seemed designed to break both horse and rider. The animal was utterly exhausted and lathered with foaming sweat and beginning to stumble dangerously on the uneven footing. As the combined weight of two riders and the constant stress of flight took their inevitable toll, Clara, despite her earlier show of renewed strength and determination, was weakening again as the brutal combination of blood loss, smoke inhalation, and physical stress accumulated like poison in her system. But her warrior spirit remained unbroken. When their horse stumbled and nearly pitched them both into a rocky ravine, she managed to shift her weight and help Chaska keep them both in the saddle. They were running out of canyon. Chaska observed grimly, noting how the walls were closing in ahead of them like the jaws of a stone trap. Soon, we'll have no choice but to make our stand and fight with whatever strength remains to us. Morrison's rifle shot fired with sniper's precision from an elevated position shattered Chaska's shoulder blade and sent him tumbling down a steep scree slope in an avalanche of loose stone and sharp-edged gravel. Pain exploded through his entire body like liquid fire, and he lost consciousness for several crucial seconds as he rolled to a stop against a massive boulder 20 feet below. Clara's terrified scream echoed through the canyon as she watched him fall, but she managed to control their panicked horse and guide it carefully down to where he lay bleeding among the scattered rocks. Her complete transformation from helpless victim to determined survivor proved itself again as she dismounted despite her own serious injuries and began dragging his much larger body toward the meager shelter provided by an overhanging rock ledge. The smoke from the fires above had grown so thick that visibility was limited to perhaps 20 yards, creating an eerie, hellish atmosphere as their final confrontation approached with the inexorable certainty of death itself. Flames licked down the canyon walls in sheets of orange and red, and the heat was becoming unbearable, forcing everyone to breathe through cloth pressed desperately over mouths and noses. "Yaska, can you hear my voice?" Clara asked urgently, her hands already working with growing expertise to apply pressure to his shoulder wound, while her eyes constantly scanned the surrounding rocks for signs of their approaching enemies. Chaska struggled to focus through waves of pain and disorientation, testing his limbs one by one, and discovering that his left arm was essentially useless. Fire lanced through his shoulder with every breath he took, but his legs still worked, and his right hand could still grip a weapon with deadly purpose. "My pistol," he managed through gritted teeth fighting against unconsciousness. "Right side of my belt." Clara found the weapon and pressed it into his good hand, just as the sound of boots on stone announced their enemy's final approach through the smoke and flames. Sheriff Crenshaw appeared first around a bend in the canyon, like a demon emerging from the pit, his own revolver drawn, and his scarred face twisted with pain and murderous fury from his wounded shoulder. Behind him came Morrison and Brewster, all three men begrimed with smoke and dust, but very much alive and absolutely determined to finish what they had started. The narrow confines of the rocky shelter created a desperate standoff. Clara and Chaska had some protection from the scattered boulders, but they were trapped with nowhere to retreat as the flames crept steadily closer to their position. The smoke had grown so thick that everyone was coughing and choking, their eyes streaming tears that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with survival, in an environment that was rapidly becoming uninhabitable for any living creature. End of the line, witnesses. Crenshaw declared, his voice carrying the grim satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered prey that had led him on far too long and dangerous a chase. "You've cost us everything we built, but this nightmare stops here and now." But Clara was no longer the broken woman who had stumbled through the desert 4 days earlier. Dakota's heroic death had awakened something fierce and uncompromising in her soul, and she met the corrupt sheriff's gaze without flinching, her green eyes blazing with righteous fury that matched the flames surrounding them. "Tell your boys the real truth. Lightning," she said, using his hated nickname with deliberate contempt and bitter sarcasm. "Tell Morrison and Brewster how their great leader murders entire families over poker debts, then stages Indian raids to cover up his crimes and steal their land." She's lying through her teeth. Crenshaw snarled, but Clara pressed her devastating advantage with the relentless precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "You shot my father with your carved bullet revolver at exactly 11:47 p.m. on May 12th. She recited with photographic accuracy. "Your first words after kicking in our door were, 'Time's up, old man, David's debt comes due in blood tonight.' You forced me to watch while Morrison beat my innocent brother to death with a pickaxe handle from our own woodshed because he couldn't pay the $300 he owed from your rigged poker games." Morrison's face went pale beneath the grime and sweat as she described the careful staging that had followed the murders planted Lakota arrows they had brought with them. Torn blanket strips scattered like props, even the specific way they had arranged the bodies to suggest a raid rather than an execution. But the heat was affecting everyone's judgment, and Brewster's nerve finally snapped completely under the combined pressure of approaching flames and devastating testimony that exposed their crimes in perfect detail. "I can't take this anymore." He wailed, his rifle wavering as panic consumed what little courage he possessed. "All those innocent families, all those children, we're going to burn in hell for what we've done, just like we're burning in this canyon." Morrison tried to steady his longtime partner, but the fat deputy was beyond any rational thought. In his terror and guilt, Brewster suddenly swung his weapon toward Morrison's back, apparently deciding in his panic that eliminating witnesses included his own accomplices. Clara spotted the betrayal developing and reacted with combat instincts she never knew she possessed, putting a bullet through Brewster's wrist before he could complete his treacherous shot. The fat man's scream of pain and terror echoed off the canyon walls as his rifle clattered uselessly away across the burning stones. Morrison spun around in shock and disbelief, finally realizing that his partner of 5 years had been preparing to shoot him in the back to save his own cowardly skin. "You bastard!" Morrison snarled, his professional composure finally cracking under the heat and betrayal. "After everything we've been through together, the flames were growing closer by the minute, and part of the canyon wall began to collapse from thermal stress, sending a shower of red-hot stones crashing down around their position. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the fire would make their location completely untenable." Crenshaw, seeing his carefully constructed criminal empire collapsing around him in literal flames, raised his revolver toward Clara with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. Their guns fired simultaneously in the superheated air, the reports echoing off the canyon walls like thunder from an angry god. His bullet scored a burning line across Clara's ribs, tearing cloth and flesh, but missing anything immediately vital. Her shot, fired with desperate accuracy born of pure survival instinct, caught him squarely in the thigh and sent him crashing backward against the canyon wall with a scream that mixed pain with frustrated rage. His badge tore free from his smoke-stained vest as he fell, the symbol of his corrupted authority, bouncing across the heated stones like a discarded piece of tin, its surface already blackened by heat and smoke from the advancing flames. Chaska, galvanized by Clara's incredible courage and the opportunity created by Crenshaw's fall, launched himself at the wounded sheriff despite his own devastating injuries and the fire that was now licking at their feet. The two men crashed together in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle, made even more desperate by the increasing heat and choking smoke that made breathing nearly impossible. The fight was savage, but necessarily brief, as the approaching flames gave them very little time for any prolonged combat. Despite fighting with essentially one usable arm, Chaska's lifetime of warrior training proved decisive against an opponent weakened by blood loss and hampered by his own wounds. They rolled across the burning ground, each man trying to gain advantage, while avoiding the worst of the spreading fire that threatened to consume them both. Crenshaw fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, using his good arm to claw at Chaska's eyes and attempting to reach the knife on his belt for one final killing stroke. But the Lakota warrior's experience in life-or-death combat situations proved far superior to the sheriff's brutality. Using techniques learned in countless battles against both human enemies and natural forces, Chaska managed to control Crenshaw despite his own significant disadvantages. He finally succeeded in pinning the corrupt sheriff face down against the heated rocks, his forearm pressed across Crenshaw's throat in a chokehold that could easily prove fatal within seconds. For a moment that seemed to last forever. The temptation to exact complete and final vengeance was almost overwhelming, to crush the life from the man who had murdered his innocent brother and countless other victims while hiding behind his badge. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Chaska could feel his own strength fading from blood loss and smoke inhalation. This would be his only chance to end Crenshaw's reign of terror permanently, to ensure that no other families would suffer as his and Clara's had suffered. But through the smoke and pain, he caught sight of Clara's eyes watching him intently. Even wounded and exhausted, she was covering Morrison and the whimpering Brewster with her captured weapon, making sure they couldn't interfere with this final confrontation between their leader and his nemesis. In her gaze, Chaska saw not bloodlust or encouragement for revenge, but something far more powerful and meaningful: hope for a justice that transcended mere killing, faith in a system of law that could work properly if good people had the courage to make it work. With tremendous effort that went against every instinct for immediate vengeance, Chaska released his grip on Crenshaw's throat and stepped back from the unconscious sheriff. The old ways of his people demanded blood, life for life. But Clara had shown him a different path forward. He stays alive to face proper judgment. Chaska declared, his voice carrying final authority, despite his labored breathing and obvious pain. Let territorial law judge him when the full truth comes out in a proper court. Morrison and Brewster, seeing their leader comprehensively defeated and their crimes exposed in devastating detail, finally broke completely under the combined pressure of physical danger and moral collapse. The deputy threw down his weapon first, his hands shaking as he raised them in abject surrender. "I never wanted to kill families," Brewster cried out, his voice cracking with fear and genuine remorse. "It was all Crenshaw's idea from the beginning, the gambling, the false raids, everything. I just went along because I was terrified of crossing him." Morrison held out longer, his military training warring with the hopeless reality of their tactical situation. But when another section of canyon wall began to collapse from heat stress and falling debris nearly crushed him, he, too, dropped his rifle and raised his hands. "Don't let us burn alive in here," he pleaded, his cold, professional demeanor finally cracking to reveal the desperate coward beneath. "We'll testify in court, tell everything we know about his operation, name every victim and every crime." The sound of approaching hoofbeats through the smoke announced the arrival of Lakota reinforcements, who had courageously followed the sound of gunfire and the pillar of black smoke rising from the canyon like a signal fire. Young Wolf led a dozen warriors who had risked their own safety to aid their war leader, their faces grim with determination and weapons ready for continued battle if necessary. They found a scene that perfectly balanced devastation with justice. 3 corrupt lawmen defeated and disarmed Chaska, wounded but victorious, and Clara conscious, despite her injuries, still holding her captured revolver, steady on their prisoners, with the composure of a seasoned warrior. Most importantly, for the cause of justice, they found evidence that could not be dismissed, explained away, or conveniently lost. Sheriff Crenshaw's official badge with its distinctive registration number, the carved bullet that matched wounds in multiple victims, and detailed testimony from multiple sources that would make conviction virtually certain. As the flames finally began to die down and cooler air started to flow through the canyon once again, Clara collapsed against Chaska's good shoulder, her strength finally exhausted, but her mission accomplished beyond her wildest hopes. In her smoke-blackened hand, Crenshaw's badge provided tangible proof of his identity and authority evidence. that could not be dismissed or fabricated when combined with her photographic memory, and the confessions Morrison and Brewster would undoubtedly provide to save their own necks from the hangman's noose. Young Wolf surveyed the aftermath with grim satisfaction, fully understanding the significance of what had been achieved through courage and sacrifice. "What about the other two?" he asked, gesturing toward the defeated lawmen who sat under heavy guard. "Morrison and Brewster have already agreed to testify against their leader in exchange for avoiding the death penalty." Chaska reported, nodding toward where the two men sat with their weapons confiscated and their faces showing the hollow despair of criminals whose elaborate schemes had finally collapsed completely. "They will tell everything they know about the false raids and murdered families to save themselves from sharing Crenshaw's fate at the gallows." Clara struggled to sit upright despite the pain lancing through her ribs where the sheriff's bullet had creased her, but her mission was not yet complete. The evidence they had gathered was crucial, but it needed to reach honest authorities who could act on it effectively. "The badge," she said urgently, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation, but filled with determination. "Don't let anyone claim it was planted or stolen from some other source. That's Sheriff Marcus Crenshaw's official badge registration number 247, and he was wearing it when he murdered my family in cold blood. The territorial records will prove its authenticity beyond any possible doubt." Young Wolf picked up the tarnished metal with appropriate reverence, understanding its significance as evidence that could break the cycle of false accusations that had plagued both peoples for years. With this proof, Clara's devastatingly detailed testimony and the confessions of Crenshaw's accomplices, they could finally demonstrate to territorial authorities that many of the Indian raids blamed on Lakota bands had actually been the work of white criminals covering their tracks. "What about our main band?" Chaska asked, wincing, as movement pulled at his wounded shoulder, but needing to know his people were safe. "Secure in the winter caves beyond Devil's Peak." Young Wolf assured him with evident relief. Grey Wolf led them through the secret passages our grandfathers showed us. "They will remain hidden until we determine whether more soldiers are coming, but they are unharmed and well supplied for an extended stay, if necessary." Chaska nodded gratefully, relieved that his people had escaped the immediate danger his choices had brought upon them. But he knew the larger threat remained. As long as corrupt officials could use anti-Indian sentiment to cover their crimes, both white settlers and native peoples would continue to suffer from escalating cycles of violence and retaliation that benefited no one except criminals and profiteers. Clara seemed to read his thoughts with the understanding that had developed between them during their shared ordeal. "There's a territorial judge in Rapid City." She said, her voice weak from exhaustion, but filled with unwavering determination. "Judge William Harrison. He's built his reputation on honesty and following evidence wherever it leads, regardless of political pressure. If we can get this evidence to him, we," Chaska asked, though he already knew her answer from the steel in her green eyes and the way she had fought beside him like a true warrior. "I have to testify in person," Clara replied without the slightest hesitation. "I'm the only witness who can connect all the pieces, prove the systematic pattern of false accusations and deliberate murder. I can identify the weapons used, describe the crimes in perfect detail, even testify about the other families they bragged about killing to cover their tracks." She paused, meeting his gaze directly, with complete honesty. "But I can't do this alone. They'll claim I'm lying to protect my Indian allies, or that I'm mentally unstable from trauma. I need someone with me who can verify my story, someone whose word carries weight with both peoples, and who understands the broader implications of what we're trying to expose." The challenges were staggering and potentially fatal. For Chaska to accompany Clara to a white settlement and testify before territorial authorities would put him in enormous personal danger. Anti-Indian sentiment ran at fever pitch throughout the territory, carefully cultivated by men like Crenshaw, and even honest officials might not believe the word of a Lakota warrior against white lawmen especially with racial tensions deliberately inflamed by the very crimes they were trying to expose. But Clara had shown him a larger truth during their shared trial by fire: that justice required courage from those who had the power to speak it, regardless of the personal cost or potential consequences. His grandfather's teachings echoed clearly in his memory. A warrior protects not just his own people, but all innocent souls wherever they may be found. For in the end, we are all one tribe under the same eternal sky. 3 weeks and 2 days later, on September 6th, Chaska and Clara sat their horses on a ridge overlooking Patterson's trading post, a weathered collection of buildings that served as neutral ground between white settlements and various tribal territories throughout the region. The journey had been longer and more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Clara's injuries from the canyon battle had required additional healing time under Winona's expert care, and they had been forced to take circuitous routes through hostile territory to avoid both military patrols and revenge-seeking associates of Sheriff Crenshaw, who refused to believe their carefully constructed story about Indian raids had been exposed as elaborate lies. But they had survived the dangerous journey, and more importantly, they had brought their evidence intact and ready for legal presentation. Below them, the trading post bustled with its usual mixture of frontier commerce white settlers bargaining for furs and buffalo hides, Lakota and Dakota traders offering horses and expertly crafted goods, mixed blood interpreters facilitating complex deals between groups who often shared no common language except the universal tongue of mutually beneficial profit. Clara had recovered most of her physical strength during the long journey, though she would carry the scars of her ordeal forever, both the visible marks on her body and the deeper wounds to her soul that would take years to heal completely. The bullet scar across her ribs had healed clean under Winona's care, but it served as a permanent reminder of how close they had all come to death in that burning canyon. More importantly, she had completed her transformation from helpless victim to determined survivor, to something approaching a true warrior in her own right. The woman who now sat confidently in her saddle. Her auburn hair braided in the practical Lakota style that Winona had taught her bore little resemblance to the broken figure who had stumbled through the Badlands over a month earlier. Judge Harrison's representative should arrive by noon, she said, checking the position of the sun with the skill of someone who had learned to read nature's signs during their journey. Along with Territorial Marshal Wade and a court clerk to take our official depositions for the formal legal record. Chaska nodded, though tension still knotted his shoulders, despite weeks of careful preparation for this crucial moment. Even with all the evidence, they carried Crenshaw's badge, the carved bullet detailed written confessions from Morrison and Brewster, who had indeed turned against their leader to save themselves from the hangman's noose. And Clara's photographic memory of multiple crimes, he remained skeptical. That white territorial authority would treat their accusations with the complete seriousness they deserved. And if they refused to believe our testimony, he asked, voicing the fear that had haunted them both during the dangerous journey to this moment of truth. Then we keep trying until we find someone who will. Clara replied with the stubborn determination that had carried her through hell and back to this opportunity for justice. There are honest men among my people, just as there are among yours. Judge Harrison has built his entire career on fairness and following evidence wherever it leads, regardless of political pressure or popular opinion. The territorial governor is under tremendous pressure from Washington to reduce the violence between settlers and tribes. Our evidence could give him the political cover he needs to clean house among the corrupt officials who profit from that violence. They rode down toward the trading post together, drawing curious but not hostile stares from the mixed crowd of customers and merchants conducting their daily business. The sight of a Lakota warrior and a white woman traveling together as equals was unusual enough to generate whispered conversations, but frontier people generally minded their own business unless directly threatened. And both Chaska and Clara carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who had proven themselves worthy of respect through trials by fire. Inside the trading post's main building, with its rough-hewn walls decorated with pelts and trade goods from across the territory, they found Judge Harrison's representative waiting exactly as promised. Thomas Mitchell was a young lawyer who had ridden hard from Rapid City specifically to hear their testimony, his clean Eastern clothes and earnest manner marking him as someone relatively new to the frontier, but absolutely determined to perform his legal duties properly, regardless of personal risk. With him were Territorial Marshal James Wade, a grizzled veteran whose weathered face and careful eyes suggested he had seen enough of frontier justice to recognize the genuine article when it appeared before him, and a professionally trained court clerk prepared to take detailed depositions that could be used in formal legal proceedings should the case go to trial. The questioning process took most of the day, with Clara providing exhaustive detail about the murders she had witnessed, while Chaska corroborated her story and added his own testimony about the broader pattern of false accusations that had cost his innocent brother's life and countless others. Mitchell proved to be thorough and professionally competent, asking probing questions designed to test the consistency of their account without showing obvious bias in either direction. The legal breakthrough came when Clara produced Sheriff Crenshaw's official badge and recited its registration number from her perfect memory, then matched it with devastating precision to the carved bullet that had killed Chaska's brother. Marshal Wade verified the information against official territorial records and confirmed beyond any doubt that the badge was indeed Crenshaw's lawful authority officially reported lost during the supposed Indian attack on Clara's family. This evidence puts an entirely different light on the entire situation, Mitchell admitted as the formal depositions concluded, and the shadows grew long outside the trading post windows. If your testimony proves accurate in court, and the physical evidence certainly supports every detail, we're looking at systematic corruption involving not just murder and fraud, but deliberate incitement of racial violence for personal criminal profit on a massive scale. What happens now that you have our testimony and evidence? Clara asked, though she kept her voice steady despite the exhaustion of reliving her family's brutal murder in precise legal detail for the official record. Now we build a comprehensive formal case that can stand up in territorial court. The lawyer replied, barely able to contain his professional excitement as he recognized the historical significance of what they had uncovered. With your detailed eyewitness testimony, this compelling physical evidence, and the written confessions from Crenshaw's accomplices, we should be able to secure legal indictments, not just for the murders of your family, but for at least 8 other violent crimes that were deliberately and falsely blamed on Indian raids. The implications of successful prosecution extended far beyond simple justice for Clara's family and Chaska's brother. If the case succeeded in territorial court, it would expose how criminal conspiracies had been systematically fanning the flames of racial conflict throughout the Dakota Territory for years, potentially opening the door to more honest and peaceful negotiations between tribal leaders and territorial authorities. But as they prepared to leave the trading post and begin their journey back to the hidden valley where Chaska's people waited, Clara made an announcement that surprised even him with its complete finality and absolute determination. I won't be returning to white settlements to rebuild my old life, she told Marshal Wade, directly meeting his surprised gaze with calm determination that brooked no argument. My family is dead. My home was destroyed. And I've seen far too much of what my own people are capable of when greed and hatred overcome basic human decency and conscience. Where will you go to start over? Mitchell asked, clearly concerned about maintaining contact with his key witness as the case developed through the territorial legal system. Clara looked directly at Chaska, with eyes that held a question she had not yet voiced aloud, but which had been growing between them during the long journey and shared dangers. That depends entirely on whether a certain Lakota warrior is willing to accept a white woman permanently into his world and his life. Chaska had been expecting this conversation since their second week on the trail. when Clara had quietly admitted she had nowhere to return to, and no family left to claim her or provide support. The practical complications were enormous and potentially dangerous. A white woman living permanently among the Lakota would face suspicion and resentment from both peoples. And their relationship had developed under extreme circumstances that might not translate successfully to the quieter but no less challenging realities of normal daily life. But he had also witnessed her courage under fire, repeatedly her willingness to fight for justice rather than simply personal survival, and her growing understanding of the complex cultural realities that governed frontier life for both peoples. More importantly, he had found in her companionship a healing for wounds he had thought would never close, and a partner whose inner strength perfectly complemented his own warrior's training and values. "My Aunt Winona has already said you are welcome in our lodge for as long as you choose to remain with our people," he replied carefully, aware that others were listening to their conversation with great interest. "Your skills as a healer's assistant have already proven valuable to our band, and your knowledge of both worlds will help us navigate the changes that are surely coming to these lands in the years ahead." And personally, Clara asked the question, carrying emotional weight that went far beyond practical arrangements or political alliances between their peoples. Chaska's answer came directly from his heart, and the first completely honest emotional statement he had made since his brother's death had turned him into a man focused only on survival and revenge. "I lost my soul when Akecheta died, consumed by grief and rage that left no room for hope or love. But I found that soul again through the sacred task of protecting yours. If you can truly accept the hardships and challenges of our nomadic life, and the difficulties we will certainly face as two peoples learning to live as one family, then I offer you not just a place among us, but my heart and my name as we become husband and wife, if you will have me." Clara's smile was radiant as she reached out to clasp his hand firmly in front of the assembled officials and witnesses, making their commitment public and binding in the eyes of both their peoples and the law. "Then, let's build that life together, starting right now today." Marshal Wade cleared his throat diplomatically, though there was genuine warmth in his weathered features as he witnessed this unexpected but somehow perfect conclusion to their legal business. "I'll need to know exactly how to contact you both if additional testimony is required as this case develops through the territorial court system." "Patterson's trading post," Chaska replied without hesitation, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had made his final choice. "We will come here during the first week of every month for supplies and news of the outside world. Any legal messages can wait for us here, and we will respond immediately to any lawful summons that serves the cause of justice for all people." As they prepared to leave the trading post and begin their journey back to the hidden valley where their new life together waited, the trading post owner, a grizzled old-timer named Patterson, who had been facilitating cross-cultural commerce and understanding for 20 years, approached them with something resembling a genuine smile on his weather-beaten face. "Miss Clara," he said, "before you folks ride out to start your new life, I've got something that rightfully belongs to you. Your brother David left it here for safekeeping before he died. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to his sister when she came looking for answers." Patterson disappeared into his cluttered storeroom and returned with a worn leather saddlebag containing David's most precious personal effects. Among them was a hunting knife, with an intricately carved bone handle, their father's knife passed down through 3 generations of Clara's family as a symbol of their heritage and values. "He wanted you to have this above all else." Patterson explained, his voice unusually gentle for such a rough frontiersman. "Said it was the one thing worth preserving from your family's history, and that you'd know exactly what to do with it when the right time came." Clara accepted the knife with tears of gratitude streaming down her face, understanding the profound symbolic importance of David's final gesture. Her brother had somehow foreseen the danger threatening their entire family, and had arranged for her to receive this precious gift, a tangible connection to her lost loved ones, and a tool that would serve her well in the challenging new life she was choosing. But as she unwrapped the knife more carefully and examined it closely in the lamplight, she discovered something that made her gasp with amazement and understanding. Hidden in a secret compartment carved skillfully into the bone handle was a small, tightly rolled bundle of papers covered with David's careful handwriting. David was keeping detailed records. She breathed, unrolling the papers with trembling hands as everyone gathered around to see. Look at this: gambling debts with specific dates and amounts, payoffs to territorial officials with names and locations, even a complete list of families Crenshaw's gang planned to target next for their land and savings. He was building a comprehensive case against the entire criminal operation before they murdered him. Marshal Wade examined the papers with growing excitement and professional appreciation, immediately recognizing their tremendous value as corroborating evidence that would make their case against the corrupt sheriff virtually airtight in any honest court. This is absolutely incredible. With these detailed records, we can not only prove the murders beyond any reasonable doubt, but expose and prosecute the entire criminal network that was operating under the protection of territorial law. Clara carefully rewrapped the precious papers and tucked them safely away. But instead of keeping her father's knife for herself, as family tradition would normally dictate, she made an impulsive decision that demonstrated how completely she had embraced her new identity and chosen family. She extended the ancient blade toward Chaska with both hands in a gesture that clearly carried deep ceremonial significance for both their peoples. This knife belonged to my father, and his father before him, carried through 3 generations of honest frontier families. She said formally, her voice carrying across the trading post so all could witness this moment. I give it freely to the warrior who restored my lost soul and showed me that true honor exists in all peoples, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they speak. May it serve him as faithfully as he has served the cause of justice, and may it seal the sacred bond between us as we build our new family together. Chaska accepted the blade with the profound gravity appropriate to such a meaningful gift, recognizing not just its practical value, but its deep symbolic importance as a bridge between their 2 worlds and their shared future. In giving him her family's most precious heirloom, Clara was demonstrating that her commitment to their life together extended far beyond mere gratitude or temporary convenience. She was choosing to make the Lakota people her people and him her husband in the most complete and permanent way possible. As they rode away from the trading post together in the gathering twilight of early autumn, heading toward the hidden valleys, where their wedding ceremony and new life awaited, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, like points of hope piercing the darkness. Behind them lay the promise of justice finally served for the dead, and real hope for reduced violence between the races as the truth about the false raids became widely known throughout the territory. Ahead lay the inevitable challenges of building a marriage across cultural boundaries that few couples had successfully navigated. But they rode as true partners now, their bond forged in fire and tested by the ultimate trial of shared danger and mutual sacrifice. Their love story had been written in blood and tears, but also in courage and hope for a better tomorrow. Clara had whispered her terrible secret to a stranger in the darkness of her greatest need, and in doing so had helped a broken warrior find his soul again and discover that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. In return, he had given her not just protection and survival, but a completely new identity, as someone whose individual courage could make a lasting difference in a world that desperately needed bridges between divided peoples. The ancient knife at Chaska's side caught the last rays of daylight, its carved bone handle warm, with the promise of new beginnings built on foundations of old wisdom and eternal values. Some gifts they had learned through trial by fire were indeed worth any sacrifice to protect and preserve. Some whispers in the darkness carried the power to transform two lost souls into something far stronger and more meaningful than either could ever have been alone. As they disappeared into the vast beauty of the Dakota Territory, riding together toward an uncertain but hopeful future, as husband and wife, their story became legend among both peoples, living proof that even in the darkest times, when hatred and prejudice seemed to rule the land with iron fists, individual acts of courage and compassion could still light the way toward healing justice and the possibility of lasting peace between different peoples sharing the same sacred earth under the same eternal sky. The rest, as they say, in the enduring stories of the American West became history written not just in blood and violence, but in love and hope for generations yet unborn who would inherit the world their courage had helped to shape.